Say your full name and your serial number if you remember it,
James Richard Rogers, 38 66 96 20.
and your unit number.
E85, 3rd Platoon, 3rd Squad, 9th person.
And the years that you served in the 10th Mountain.
From 1944 in August till I was wounded in February the 22nd up on the mountain here.
And the highest rank served.
PFC. I didn't realize the PFC till I got back. I was at the bottom of the heap.
Okay. Because it's so cool, I'm afraid we won't get to everything I want to get to, so I want to get right to the part about when you were wounded up here. Tell me what led up to it and what happened.
Well, we came up and it's all kind of blurry for a few days. We were being shot at and everything, but this particular night we were going up the mountain at night, and about 2 o'clock in the morning we topped a hill and it sloped to the left and down, and I thought this is going to be pretty easy walking now and make it a little better and not too many shells falling around then. And I had 10 seconds after that all hell broke loose, and about 100 and 200 feet in front of me, looking downhill about 20 degrees across a little open field with snow on it, everything was coming out of bullets and everything, and I hit the ground and we were making a 90-degree turn, and I was on the end of the line like a whip hopper, so we had about 45 degrees into that, and I could almost believe the bullets were going in and out of my guys' helmets, and my Sergeant Nussbaum, is leading the way. We hit the ground, and I thought I'd roll to the left down the mountain to get out of that, and he said hit the trench, and I thought, yeah, trench, I'd like a foxhole, but the ground was hard and not enough time. I looked up and they were running, hollering, hit the trench towards the way they were shooting, and they let up. The shooting let up, so I ran about 45 degrees across there, and we got into a trench which was really a German mortar emplacement, and we were coming around the back side of it whenever they hit us with a counterattack. There wasn't enough room in there for everybody. I laid on a guy's legs and he moved up, and my feet was about ground level. And so after we got there, they quit shooting. And I didn't know why. Later, I think they thought we were charging them, because 2 days before that had happened, but we were running for a hole. Well, I laid on this guy's legs, so he moved up. Shooting stopped. I thought, well, I'll just get up and see, make sure they're not coming across there. And that was a bad thing to do, because they cut loose again. Luckily, they didn't hit me, and I got back down. Well, the rest of the guys were deep enough in the hole they couldn't look out. So then I raised up about shoulder height to see what I could get. And they must have saw my silhouette, because they were looking up with me against the sky. Now this is like 2 or 3 in the morning of the 22nd of February, 45. And so I would get up and look, and finally I just got where it'd peep over. I guess they could still see movement. And every time I do that, they'd cut loose. I did this about 10 or 15 times, and my Sergeant Nussbaum, he was over where he couldn't see, and I couldn't understand. He'd say, finally he got to say, Rogers, get up and look. I'd look, and finally he said about the 5th time, and it was irritating me a little bit. I was doing it anyhow, and I just told the sergeant if he liked this in the hole any better than mine, I'd swap with him. I really wouldn't have unless it was a direct order, because I felt like I was in control, but I also realized how he felt. Well, they kept laddering mortars in on us, and we were close enough. It was probably wasn't 150 feet down the slope from us. When while we were there, there was somebody said, "This is Sergeant Olson." That was my squad leader. And men moved back. He said about 3 times. Well, I knew Olson's voice pretty well, and it had a deep German accent. And I said, "Don't move back. That's a damn German." And I'm staying where I at, and everybody else did too. So we didn't move. But I kept counting the mortars, and they were hitting us. A good thing we got it, but it was hitting us behind there. All the guys behind there, it was taking their toll. I felt pretty safe because we were too close to those guys. They're not going to throw anything that close. Well, they kept getting closer, and I would count. I don't know what number 3 or 4, but one hit just outside where I was. And of course, it was knee level, and I felt like I went 10 feet in the air. And I came down, and I reached, and I felt nothing from my waist down, and I thought both legs were gone. I reached down and felt my right one. It was there. My left one, it was there, but there was a hole in the leg. So I didn't say anything. I just sat up, and pretty soon I think the sergeant said, "Is anybody hit?" And I said, "Yeah, I am." But I never lost consciousness or anything, but I was there still ready to do something. I didn't know how serious it was. After I found I had both legs, and so then it died down a little bit, and within 10 minutes, somebody had called a medic. And here he come walking up from the back. And I thought, well, man, he's brave, because my head going a little bit up, so he made it up there, straddled my leg in the hole, and when he was up with his back to where the fire was coming from, suddenly they cut loose again. And I swear the bullets were going right by his helmet. I reached up and grabbed him by the nape of the neck and pulled him down in there with me, which was a little safer as far as small arms fire. And then it died down. Day began daybreak, and he said, "Can I help you? Can you walk?" And I said, "I don't know." So he stood up. He said, "I'll help you go back." And then there's a building about 100 yards back. I thought it was a house. Somebody else thinks it's a church, and I'm going to be looking today and see if I can find it or later this week. And they took me back there and put me in there, and there was one guy in there who was shell-shocked. And as we went back, though, I could see people groaning and hurting, and one guy, one area was hollering for his mother, and they were worse in shape than I was in. Evidently, the medic walked by him, or I don't know where he came from, but they needed more help than I really did. He got my bleeding stopped and made it in there all right. And after I was there a little while, they brought another guy in. Now this was beginning to get daybreak. The sun was beginning to come up. And he was bleeding all over, talking like mad, and he began to fade away. And suddenly another guy, they brought another fellow in there, and I looked, and he was in my outfit. His name was Everett DeClue. In fact, he don't live about 30 miles from me now. And he was, to me, unconscious. He told me he saw me in there, standing up. I said, "You didn't see me standing up. You were out." Besides that, I wasn't standing. So anyhow, he came in, and then he began to revive and came up. And then he finally went into shock. And I didn't remember it, because he told me this, the last couple months, that when he went into shock, well, the sun was beginning to come through a window, which no glass in it. So I'd moved over there where the sun was hitting me. It was cold in there. And of course, I was pretty comfortable as far as temperature was then. And so he went into shock. So he told me, and I'd forgot about this. When he began to shake, I took my jacket off and covered him up. And later, that was about 11 o'clock in the morning then when he brought him in. He was wounded at 10:30 that morning. At 7 o'clock, I heard the guys push off again, and it's in the history. So I know I can relate to that. After I wrote this up, by the way, before I ever read it. And so this relates pretty well. And he hadn't no more than been gone out there for 3 or 4 minutes until they began to shell us. And they were shooting over. And Wayne told me later that he was on the stretcher. He couldn't even walk. And the mortars were hitting, so they dropped the stretcher and ran for a foxhole. And he said, "Hey, fellas, don't leave me here. Put me in a barn over there," he said. "If I'm going to die, I'd rather die in the barn." So they kept doing this. They'd taken everybody out except the shell shock guy. Just me and him in that one room, and I don't know what else was in the building. And suddenly I heard a loud noise.
It's a difficult thing to think about.
Mm-hmm.
It seems that people process it and package it.
I guess you get older, you think about it. See, I just erased it.
Did you?
Yeah, I just erased it.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to start with an introduction. This is part 2 of Richard Rogers, 85. Okay, so you were in the house.
Right after they'd taken the other guys out, except the guy with shell shock, they were shelling us, and they were going over us, and they kept getting closer and closer. And I heard a loud noise, and I thought, "Geez, is that tanks? Or have they counterattacked us with tanks? Is that an airplane?" And I realized there wasn't no German aircraft there, or too many if there was any. And then I suddenly realized, and I heard a loud rockets going off, and I think it was a P-47 came right over the house, shot down the mountain, and they had mobile 88s down there. Well, they quit. That took care of them for 15 minutes, and here they did it again. And they'd start and they get closer and closer. And about the third, and the sorties, they went ahead about third pass over the sorties with their rockets. And they'd leave, and then they'd have time to get back up. They hit the building with it, and I thought they're going to knock this building down before we can get out of it. And about that time, I think I think their P-47s came through, and you could hear them shooting the rockets down the mountainside, and they must have taken them out. And I always gave the flyboys a okay for that. If I could ever do anything for the flyboys, I'd do it. So luckily, when I got back from service, I went to work for McDonald Aircraft, and we built the world's best fighters for Air Force and the Navy and the Marines. Now, you got a question?
No, that's excellent. That's nice that you...
You got any other questions now?
Oh, was that the end of that story?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, basically.
Okay, I have a couple of questions.
What was it? Do you know the date of that all that happened?
That was February the 22nd, 1945, and I said that once in there.
Good.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, here's a question. I mean, that was obviously 60 years ago, but is it difficult to think about what happened and talk about it?
More so 2 years ago than it is now, because once I related to people that were there, you can do this better. But when I got home and I start to tell people about things, they didn't really seem to understand it. And in the St. Louis reunion, I met George Rosenfeld. And there was one thing, now this is before we were hit, we were going up, and it was in the daytime, and they'd shell us, and we'd get off the path and come back in, and as we went around one curve, and this is right when we first started up there, there was a guy there, and it was the 4th platoon, and what they were talking about yesterday, it was a 4th platoon, a weapons platoon, and I knew the guy I knew a guy in there, but I didn't know this guy, and there was a guy sitting on his hands and knees with a mortar pack on his back. And we'd been dropping down every once in a while, and I thought, well, I'll go over and help him. So I went over to help him up, and one of the guys said, don't bother, he's dead. He got a direct hit, evidently, and he was still on his hands and knees, kind of leaning against this cliff a little bit, and I probably never went hit him, still with his full load of mortars. And of course, as we went up, there was a guy, Spread Eagle, that got hit direct, and it got pretty rough from there on up. As far as, now we were coming through, and I'm trying to find out where we were, but my battalion came through the other two, so we were going through what they had just witnessed, and it was pretty devastating, yeah.
What were you thinking when you were coming through a devastated area like that?
Well, I felt, and we met some of the people coming back, and they looked like they needed to come back, and they were pretty, worn, almost like death warmed over, and they were pretty exhausted. And we knew we were getting into that. We were anticipating that. I had some misgivings, but I was eager to get up there and do it. So, 18 years old. Well, let's see, I don't know when I had my 19th birthday. I had over somewhere on the mountain, I think. 25th of January was my birthday. And it was somewhere in that area that, after that, I think it's more into February. So I really had my 25th birthday. But I knew what we were going into, and I was ready. You had some misgivings, but same token, I was ready to go. And when we first got off, launched off, we dropped our full fuel packs, and they said they'd bring them up to us later. Well, in 10 minutes, I just heard this. The Germans hit us with a couple of 88s. Now, this is prior to this, what I just told you. And they blew it all to smithereens. So everything I owned was in there, except what I had with me. They gave us ammunition. I don't think they gave me any hand grenades, and I think I hear later that some of them were a little loose, and they didn't hand them to everybody. And so as we went on up, and then they began to shell us, and this is the start. And we was going up the mountain, and the shells were going over us. I'm sure they hit because they were going way over us. 4 tanks across the way going up over about 150 yards across in an open field. We were walking in the woods so that we wouldn't step on mines or they couldn't see us. And it was getting awful tiresome. And I looked over and these guys were riding that tank, and man, I wanted to do that. Well, About 5 minutes later, they got a direct hit on the tank, and the guys were right, either blew them off or they jumped off. And of course, we were moving up fast. We couldn't stop, and we kept going. And one of the best meals I ever had, I've told somebody this the other day, maybe I told you. We got up there, my legs would feel like it was ready. We got a 10-minute break, shelling had slept, and I reached in my K rations and I pulled out cheese and crackers. And I can remember today how good that tasted. And I would say that was one of the better meals I'd ever had, even though it was cheese and crackers. Is there anything else you want to ask?
I think that's perfect. Excellent. Thank you, dear.
Okay.
Yeah. It's good to be here. Buongiorno signori.
Buongiorno, ben arrivati.
Lo domandavo, ci ricordo 2 anni fa.